it's a great metaphor for the UK. The government is lobbying the government for self-driving cars that aren't self-driving.
Welcome to Crash, the technology podcast about everything else. Today, let's try to work out why Royal Mail can't deliver things to post offices, trying to work out why the government wants to be aggressive with a purpose on tech, and trying to work out why the iPhone is being blamed for the lack of children being born. I'm Alex Hudson.
And I'm Chris Stokel-Walker. You were late, Alex, like a Royal Mail delivery. What's the deal with that?
I was at a breakfast from 7 a.m. this morning. I'm up north tomorrow morning. I am all over the place. I am chaos. I had to consult a lawyer about what we're about to talk about. Everything is madness. And also, I think more fascinatingly, the entire news agenda in our sort of set is just breaking. So there's the whole child nudity thing that Signal's reacted really strong to. There's a whole load of Panorama investigations going on. There's the Apple conference, and all the news is breaking. How are you coping? Because you must be getting thousands of notifications every second.
I just ignore it. Just bury your head in the sand. But you're right. This was an episode that you literally said just 2 days ago. Well, not a lot going on. We'll do a bit more of a timeless one. And then everything seems to have happened, it makes it interesting and fun. Remember, Alex, this is why we do the job, because we like that nervous energy that is created when things happen like this and we have to respond and make sense.
Sleep. We hate sleep.
Yeah.
What's been in your week? What has happened in your world? What have I missed? Because usually, to draw back the curtain a tiny bit, I do I've got a sort of agent set up to just send me a link to view Chris's pieces so I can at least pretend that I read everything he writes. This week I have not even consulted that. I read some of it. Some of it's very fabulous. All of it's fabulous, of course. I don't read all of it. But what has been exciting? I saw the Nature article pop up, and I haven't read that, so I'm sorry. But what is that about?
Good question. What is that about? What was the Nature article? It was...
You tweeted about it yesterday.
Did I? Let me see what I tweeted about. You would think that I use a bot to tweet things out, but I really don't. It's just that I face a lot of issues. So this was researchers starting to get a little bit worried about what they do now that AI bots are scraping everything. Ironic, given what we've just been talking about. And the principle of open science starting to go by the wayside because people go, actually, do I want to have my data set be subsumed by a bot? Because they might then do further research on it, which kind of invalidates my results or stops me from doing the paper that I wanted to do 2 years down the line. Or because in the case of one suicide researcher that I spoke to, the people who you are speaking to speak to you on the principle and the basis that their information will be carefully used and not put out into the ether in a way that is quite harmful. And actually, we know that AI systems now can often de-anonymize information and get a good guess at who you might be. So there's a whole, on the kind of the beat of everything is being ruined by AI at the same time as everything is being exciting by AI. This is kind of on the ruin beat.
Well, we've just got a clip out this morning. So with you being quoted as, what is it? If you can't see the point of AI, so if you can't see the usefulness of AI, you're obviously an idiot. you're willfully ignoring the possibilities or something like that.
Yeah, and I think that's true. And I stand by that still a week on. I don't just say these things. Like, I genuinely do believe it. And the more that... So I do think there is I don't think that I have this standing with the general public, but I do think perhaps there is a story worth doing of, look, we told you 3.5 years ago that AI was going to be a big thing. You all tried it and did a shopping list with ChatGPT in late 2022 and realized, actually, I don't see the point in this. Now genuinely is the time for you to start paying attention again, because there is this interesting inflection point. If there's one thing that I can say as a wizened tech journalist operating in the UK media space, it is that my words should have weight on this. And so I envisage in the Telegraph or the Times a picture of me, Harry Wallop-like, having a photo taken of me, kind of looking pensive and going, 4 years ago, we told you this is a big thing. You didn't think it was. Actually, now you should revisit it because it is becoming much more useful for you.
I feel like the Telegraph would take that. Have you pitched the Telegraph that precise article of give it another go?
No, but I because my long-standing, firmly held belief that actually people don't care what I say has stopped me from doing so, because it requires me to inherit the ego that would suggest that my view matters on this sort of thing, where it really doesn't.
Or you might set up a podcast just saying, I feel like that horse has bolted. I'm sorry to break it to you. Anyone who has set up a podcast has to, of course, the crippling fear that our voice doesn't matter is ever present, but no one sets up a podcast without wanting their voice heard.
You know what? So you very kindly, we talked about it last week. We were in the immediate afterglow of SXSW London, which is a delightful word to use for such a complicated event to speak about. I decided against it, but when I went on stage, I did toy with the idea of introducing myself a little bit and trying to give a shout out to the podcast, which I failed to do. I'm sorry for that, Alex. But the way that I was going to do it is I was going to say, like most people in East London, I have a podcast because I thought that's my reference, my Shoreditch cultural insignia that I cling on to.
I think the problem with that would be everyone just assumes you would live in East London, so the nuance of that clever sort of self-satire would be probably lost.
No, they say, what is the problem with this? This is great, fantastic, well done, rather than realising I'm actually making fun of them.
Just on a final AI point before we get into the bulk of it, have you seen the YouGov polling? I don't know how recently this is because it popped up in a couple of private groups around the fact that the people most fearful and think that AI is going to do the worst is actually the 18 to 24-year-olds. So that it almost goes down by age. The older people, it goes up slightly when you get above pension age, but for the most part, the older you are, the less fearful you are about it, which both seems very logical and entirely illogical. And I don't know what to make of it.
I think it's that you're worried that this is going to trample your career path, which is, long-time listeners will know that Alex got shouted at by a bunch of students because of exactly this reason, where he was saying AI is fantastic and amazing and you don't need to worry about it. And they were very, very worried about it. So the research doesn't surprise me.
That's a bad paraphrase.
Is it?
Of my nuanced, detailed view.
No, in my recollection, you told everybody they were wrong and that they were stupid, and then they almost started fighting you. That's how I imagined it in my mind anyway.
There's no way of checking how that conversation went on the podcast, no way at all. So that must be your version is absolutely right.
Okay, yeah, exactly. But no, I mean, there's a real fear there, and so it doesn't surprise me that is the split. Generally, I think the one thing that is great about AI, and I acknowledge this as well. Like, I'm middle-aged, unfortunately, increasingly so, as I kind of wake up and stagger up.
We are not middle-aged. I refuse to acknowledge this.
Mid to late 30s, therefore I am. Particularly if you're a journalist and you've got high blood pressure, definitely I am. But I think that, AI is a really beneficial tool for me because I already know the stuff that I need to know, the basics, and it can act as a kind of force multiplier. If you're 18 to 24, you're a recent grad, or you're thinking about getting into the world of work, or you're struggling to get into the world of work having graduated, you are probably looking at that and going, yeah, well, I'm not surprised that people who are older think that it's great because they're using it instead of training me up. And that is a big issue.
Yeah, I still maintain the fact that if you're young, you have the capacity to learn quicker and you don't have any existing learnt practices. So you could be like, oh, I've tried this new thing. You could be more nimble. You can do things that more established people cannot. And that's your USP. But I feel like, as we found out at that student publications conference, not agreed by almost anyone. So let's get on to our big story, which actually is a Crashed exclusive. Happy days. So Royal Mail is a bit of a mess. And that's not just my reasoned journalistic view, but the carefully argued opinion, though I have paraphrased it, of the regulator Ofcom. So I can exclusively reveal that it is impossible to directly talk to a human customer service agent for Parcelforce deliveries, no matter how hard you try, and almost impossible for Royal Mail inquiries. I really wanted to say that it is impossible, but it's not quite. I can also reveal that Parcelforce is sometimes unable to deliver to post offices, which is terrible and funny, and they keep being fined for missing targets, and Ofcom is desperately trying to get them to modernise. So entirely coincidentally, while I was doing the digging on this, the regulator Ofcom opened a formal investigation into Royal Mail and missing targets again. So the watchdog has already fined Royal Mail £21 million last year, £10.5 million for the year before, and £5.6 million for 22-23. No fines were decided in the period 3 years previous because of COVID, but it was fined £1.5 million for 2018-2019. So we're going to go get into the deep details of what that means and all the funny stories and the silliness of it. But Chris, I think the biggest question of this, did you know that Ofcom was Royal Mail's regulator before this came about?
I did, because I've read
How?
BBC reporting on this, and I know all about it. And I have a link to the postal service. My dad, for a short period of time, was a Royal Mail postman. So I can tell you all about the walks. They don't call them rounds; they call them walks. I can tell you all about the parcel sorting and the priority there. I even helped him when he was applying for the job. He got made redundant later in his life, and he needed a job to kind of tide him over until retirement. And so he wasn't very good at tech stuff. So I helped him get through the job interview process. Again, another example of me knowing far more about a random thing than you might first think.
But so it hurt my mind, and I didn't understand why. I mean,
Communications, Alex. Communications. Ofcom is a communications regulator. The post office, Royal Mail, is the original form of communication. How else were we meant to keep in touch if not through post? If we were doing this several hundred years ago, you would be sending us telegrams and also perhaps some post.
Yeah, so the post office did originally do telegrams, and it also accounted for a lot of the other communications. It's wild how much the post office used to cover. Okay, after that, we're going to tackle this story in three parts. So the first is the customer service debacle. The second is not actually delivering to post offices, and the third, which is arguably what Crash should really be doing, not the rest of it. So we'll spend the most time on it. It's the technological implications here of what Royal Mail is actually doing, and just a broad question of shouldn't technology have made delivery simple given that there are half the letters that there were 10, 15 years ago? So let's start with the fun stuff. So with the automation of customer service lines, Parcelforce, a wholly owned subsidiary of Royal Mail, has made it impossible to speak to a human directly, either by email or by phone. I really wanted to say that it's all of Royal Mail, but if you're willing to wait at least 40 minutes on hold, genuinely, and wait up to 7 days, however this may take longer during busy periods by email, you can speak to a human about Royal Mail, not Parcelforce. So it's different if you're a business customer. There are a number of different carve-outs and caveats, but so much of it has been automated. And in response to this, we're going to get the right to reply in early. We offered Royal Mail a chance to be interviewed and to come on and chat to us. That offer still stands any time. They declined, but said it is not right to say there is no route for customers to speak to someone directly. Parcelforce customers can raise delivery issues through customer service channels, including by phone or through the online contact form, with cases then handled by customer service teams. I asked them for specific advice on exactly the route to do that, including which buttons to push, but they have not responded to that question at the time of recording. Are we in that sort of post-human age of customer service? And it kind of comes in waves where everyone thinks that actual humans involved in it is a good idea or a bad idea. And is this as a symptom of a wider thing, or is Royal Mail doing something particularly left field or modernising or whatever you want to call it?
I think that Royal Mail is behind the times in this generally, because it feels like they're very much still an analog system trying to catch up to the digital era. But the idea of replacing humans or making it harder to get to humans is obviously that long-standing thing that we've been learning about for at least 2 decades, I would suggest. The idea that actually we're layering in AI to this, and AI is seen as some sort of way of automating out a lot of the friction that you used to have. So, at the end of the endless phone tree, as you've been trying to get through with Royal Mail, you could still speak to a human. These days, I think it gets put front and center that you have an AI assistant, you have voice recognition, and it tries to understand and solve your problem from there. I mean, I had the same thing with KLM, where I was going to miss a flight on the way back from Lithuania. And
Of your 1,000 holidays where you are working the whole time.
yeah, quote unquote holiday. I had to. You'll notice that I lingered because I was trying to figure out where the hell I was and where I was going
Yeah,
back from. But that, yeah, there it was an AI voice effectively on the end of the phone, and it was like, "Let me try and solve your problem. Explain in 2 sentences or so what it is that you're trying to do." And eventually, I did get through to a human being, and they solved that problem. But there was no way they were going to be able to do that through an AI system. I mean, I'm not surprised, but I am surprised at how difficult you have found it, and this is born out of your own personal frustration.
it started with my personal frustration. We're going to come onto that in a beautiful moment in the sort of second bit. But I think all good journalism comes from that sort of personal frustration. That sort of, well, no, not all good journalism. All good sort of social justice warrior comes from that sort of personal aggrievement and working out a way to so finding your own personal experience and moving that into a story and taking your personal example and improving it and showing that it is widespread. I think my question, because all of the terrible customer service or lack thereof, given the technological improvements, I don't know how terrible customer service would have to be for me to choose a different path. So I think a really good thing is like the airlines. You don't choose the airline based on customer service. You don't really, unless you're doing long haul, base it on your legroom. You base it on which one's cheapest for the most part. And so with the mail, it's more what's the cheapest option rather than what is the most effective. So how bad would it have to be for customers to change their behaviour around Royal Mail?
Pretty bad, but I guess the problem is that the worst possible provider, and it gained a reputation for this to the extent that it literally rebranded, was Every, right? They were seen as the kind of worst of the worst here. We're not saying that they are still terrible or anything like that, not least because they don't exist with that name.
No, Every does. So they used to be called Hermes. They now are called Every.
There you go. Perfect. Okay, so Hermes into Every. So Every does exist, but it's still not terrible. And they would have their own arguments and justifications as to why they had these issues. Being legally safe here.
I think we're being very careful with our language because we haven't done the deep digging and the journalistic rigor around Every's do and don'ts.
No, but we have. Like, they had huge investigations. There was panorama documentaries. There was all these issues. Like, it was widely regarded. There was public polling that suggested that people viewed them as the worst possible option. But I certainly don't look at it from a who is going to be handling my package or my parcel approach. It's just these are the providers that are used by online retailers or whatever, or these are the options available to me when I go into a post office or to a delivery counter. And so you have to take it. It is, kind of a fait accompli, I suppose.
If you look at what Vinted is doing, so Vinted is actually, we should probably have a wider conversation on some of the innovations that Vinted is doing and really, really changing what that sort of peer-to-peer seller market is doing. But what Vinted has done very, very cleverly, I think, is when you get to the delivery point, you can say, okay, here's the price for this provider, here's the price for this provider, and depending on which area you're in, you get a number of different providers, but you are often given 3 or 4. You can have it delivered to your house, you can have it delivered to a post office. Well, we'll get onto that.
Or not.
Or not, but actually having that option is a really key thing. So people are making that choice, and so we should probably go on to what the hell happened to me. So it turns out, and I need to be very careful with my wording here, is that Parcelforce, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Royal Mail, is unable to deliver things to the post office. So my personal story ended up with me taking a 3-hour round trip to pick up a parcel from somewhere in East Ham, so out in the depths of East London. But it turns out that because the post office is still state owned with individual franchises owners running the branches, it's actually quite a widespread issue. So I thought it was just me, and I was maybe expecting to find a couple of examples of refusal of delivery, but actually I found a load. And if you have any examples of you having to travel for hours, then do get in touch. But essentially, it works out that post offices are keeping to refuse deliveries of big Parcelforce parcels for a number of reasons, but primarily because of the space that they take up. And given the franchise model, it comes down to individual branches to choose. And so often it means a long journey. There are only 54 Parcelforce sorting depots, and they just get dumped there and left there for 7 days. And if you look through the Google reviews, if you got some fun spare time, they are not kind about Parcelforce. So I went to Royal Mail directly and asked whether or not Parcelforce, whether it's true that Parcelforce cannot even deliver to post offices. And the spokesperson said it's not the case that Parcelforce items cannot be delivered to post office branches. Parcelforce parcels can be delivered to a post office in some circumstances, but it depends on the service used and whether the branch is able to accept the item. Some larger parcels cannot be redirected to post office branches because of storage limitations, so not every parcel can be automatically be sent to every branch. And as the post office is a separate business, individual branches decide what they are able to accept and store safely. Chris, in some circumstances, is doing a lot of the work there in that right to reply. Is it not mad? Is it not mad that Parcelforce can only deliver to post offices in some circumstances?
Yes, it is as a customer, but I can understand it from the business point of view if they are separate. And I like
balance. Stop giving us balance.
No, but I can. Right, because so if I look, there is this broader story here, right, of declining numbers, the post office really struggling, Royal Mail struggling with the idea of being able to actually make this a viable concern, which is part of the reason why you're starting to see these service cutbacks, why you have your first class deliveries maintained, but second class deliveries being cut back enormously in terms of the time that it takes to actually get them through the letterboxes after delivery. The real estate that the Royal Mail used to have in terms of the number of post offices and the branches, they used to be standalone branches. And if I look over my lifetime, I can remember when they had standalone branches. I remember going. I used to be a wrestling fan, Alex. I used to be a professional wrestling fan. I probably still have an encyclopedic knowledge of professional wrestling up until around about the mid 2000s, I would guess. Over my lifetime, I can remember buying. Oh my gosh, what were they called? Postal orders, because I used to buy hooky wrestling tapes, which makes me sound like a dirty old man standing in a Mac next to a street corner or something like that. But there's
a lot of sort of problematic stuff in professional wrestling in the late 90s, early 90s that got weird at points in the sort of mid 90s, late 90s.
Got very weird all the time, still is weird now. So I was talking about postal orders, and I remember physically going into a post office branch, like a standalone post office branch in Gateshead near where I lived, and buying these postal orders and sending them off and receiving tapes in return through the post. Then I remember having to go in the sort of later phases of that, so we're talking now the mid-2000s, having to go to a WH Smith's branch in the middle of Newcastle, where there was the top floor devoted to the Royal Mail, to a post office, effectively. Now, if I wanted to do the same sort of thing, my local post office branch is a side bit of a newsagent's. And it used to be a bigger side bit of a newsagent's, but it's an even smaller bit now. So I can absolutely understand the same issue that you have with parcel deliveries, with missed deliveries or with returns of private delivery companies, where you'll often have to go to a corner shop and they will only have a finite amount of shelf space to store your parcels before they have to send them back. So in that way, I can imagine it. But in terms of the end user experience, the customer experience, if Parcelforce is wholly owned by Royal Mail, if this is the postal service writ large, it seems incomprehensible that these two things cannot talk to one another.
It's very, very funny. The whole thing is hilarious, but in a way that means that Ofcom has kept talking about the poor service. It keeps finding them, and actually, Ofcom have responded to us, and they've made us a recording. So we're gonna play that now.
We're most concerned about outcomes for consumers. We know Royal Mail's performance is poor, and that means people continue to experience delays receiving their letters. So last year, 75% of first-class letters were delivered on time, but this was against our target of 93%. And we just know how frustrating that is for people across the country. So that's why we fined the company $37 million over the last 3 years and pressed them for a credible plan to turn things around. Royal Mail are responsible for the day-to-day running of their operations. But what's important for us as the regulator is that we need to make sure the rules keep pace with how the market is changing. And the way people use posts has changed dramatically. So we've seen a huge decline in the number of letters being sent each year, and we're sending more parcels than ever before. And really, that's why we've reformed the obligations on Royal Mail. So our changes clear the path for Royal Mail to modernise by changing the structure of how letters are delivered. In doing that, we know Royal Mail are using technology, so they use algorithms to sort mail more efficiently. In the future, AI could be used to optimize driver routes in real time, for example. But overall, the most important thing is that Royal Mail implement the changes quickly, effectively, and really get service back to the standard that consumers expect.
That's Fergal Farraher, Policy Director at Ofcom, speaking to Crashed via recorded message earlier. And which that kind of segues us on to the actual technology bit in our technology podcast about the price of first-class stamps. So we will get into that. So delivery should be so much easier, or we imagine that delivery has become so much easier because of automation, because of technology, because everything is much more smoother. You can scan a QR code and you can know exactly where everything is at any given time. But according to the parliamentary record Hansard, 88.8% of first-class mail made it in the next working day in 1974. 87.5% in 1984. And in 1970, the price of a stamp, if you adjusted for inflation, was around 45 pence. And it cost 27p in 2000, which, if you work it out for inflation, is around 58p. And currently, a first-class stamp in 2026 costs £1.65. The number of letters has halved over a decade from around 13 billion to around 6.7 billion in 2024. And in 1974, around 11 billion letters were sent, according to the Postal Museum. And yet, Ofcom have fined Royal Mail because in 2026, 75.7% of first-class mail was delivered the next working day, compared to its target, then target of 93%. That target has now been reduced down to 90%. And 90% of second-class mail was delivered short of the 98.5% target, which has been revised down to 95%. Ofcom says that the service levels have remained unacceptable, which, given that Royal Mail currently employs between 130,000 and 150,000 people, with an extra 25,000 people working in those post offices, which, as discussed, separate from Royal Mail, it's about the same as it was in 2010, and it's relatively similar to how it was in the 70s. So the same number of people are working, Chris. Why is it broken? Why hasn't technology fixed it? And can you fix the whole issue and in this sort of muddy data set? So to give it full credit, it's not apples for apples, but why is it not simpler?
Because the volume has gone up. It isn't simple because the way that our doors are designed in our houses or our flats, they are designed for letters. Whatever you were trying to get, I presume, did not fit through a letterbox.
It was a cricket bag. It would be.
Yeah, good luck. Good luck trying to get a cricket bag through a letterbox. That's a question to which there is no answer. How do you get that through that?
The malleable materials of the future, where you can stretch and shrink stuff, is this? I'm enthralled by that principle, which graphene was meant to offer and never did.
I was going to say, we brought it back to tech. Graphene is the way that you solve the post office's problems. It's the way it works.
I am a graphene truther. It's one of my most read articles I've ever written. Was sort of the first mainstream outing of what graphene could do, and I am still fascinated by the overpromise, underdeliver of that particular technology. Sorry, yes, expandable cricket bags. How did we get onto that?
If only, yeah. So the problem is, it is understandable because the volumes have gone up. In terms of, yes, the letters have gone down, but the number of parcels has gone up. People order stuff online 24/7. They don't work from home 24/7. So what happens is you have, and I have this experience, I live in a block of flats, and I have, I had a really good postman who was very, very friendly with my granddad, who obviously was, in his 80s and then early 90s before he died. And so he would spend most of his time at home. So you would have a block of flats. He lived in that block of flats as well. The postman knew that they could ring his doorbell and that they could be let in when inevitably the person that they were trying to deliver to was not answering because they were at work. And so their ASOS delivery or whatever it was could be dropped off in the communal space. But there is that problem, right, of if you are having to try and cart 20, 30, 50 parcels or packages on a delivery walk, whereas you used to have maybe 300 letters, you could put the 300 letters through the letterbox whether or not the person was there, with exceptions, of course, for special deliveries signed for and things like that. It's online shopping's fault as much as it is Royal Mail and the post office's inability to keep on track of what's going on and how we are changing our lives. And that brings us back to that idea that actually this is a very slow business to adapt to changes in society. it's traded on that, and that's the consequence of it becoming such a big problem, right? Is they did not recognize or step up to the change as it was happening. Now they've been fully lapped by it, and we're living with the consequences, and you are unable to get your cricket bag without a 3-hour round trip.
So what Royal Mail is doing is it's under Royal Mail was taken over around this point last year. So it was taken over by a man known as the Czech Sphinx, mainly for his styling. So the billionaire Daniel Kretinsky, and he's worth around £6 billion. And he also is a big shareholder in West Ham. He owns Football Club Sparta Prague. He owns a significant stake in Sainsbury's, and he's the largest shareholder in Foot Locker. It's a broad spectrum of stuff. But one of his big pushes is around. He owns other postal companies within Europe, but his big push is out of home stuff. So if you've started seeing Royal Mail, those delivery boxes pop in supermarkets, that's one of his big things. It started off as about 1,500 last year, and he wants to get it to around 20,000 as soon as possible. So I think Amazon has around 6,000. The sort of market average is around 6,000, so they're behind. They're looking to get ahead. And to your point, then that should solve all of that problem, and everyone could just go to a supermarket and pick up a box.
Solves all of the problems. Solves, decent number, I think. No, because it isn't as convenient. But I think one of the problems that we've had, and I did a story, 7-8 years ago now for New Scientist, a long feature about the last mile of delivery and the challenges that causes. Online retail is enormously unsustainable as a concept, right? We have got used to the idea that you can order 5 things in 5 different sizes. You can send 4 of those things back, if not all of them, for pretty much free. And damn the consequences on both the environment and the poor people that end up having to deliver it. It's this car crash of multiple problems. It's the postal service not keeping up to date with what has been going on. It's online retail putting unrealistic expectations for everyday users on what they can and can't do and how convenient this thing is because they want to gain market share. And it's us as the public not realizing that actually there does need to be some friction here. And so if you have to go to a sort of click and collect delivery style set of post boxes outside your local Sainsbury's or your local Morrison's or whatever, then that serves 2 purposes. Number one, it stops those failed deliveries at home, which means that there's more time spent on successful deliveries. But also, it introduces friction. And it makes you think as a consumer, actually, there are consequences to this. I have to either get in the car or go walking or whatever to get up and pick up my parcel. That is making you think more about this, and it probably makes you think more about not buying stuff the second time around.
Until drones come, automate everything. Everything is delivered in half an hour, and the entire delivery solution, the entire delivery problem is solved. We should probably stop there because we've been recording for a long time. We'll be back in 1 second. Welcome back to part 2 of Crash, the technology podcast about Chris Stokel-Walker, the Royal Mail apologist. I was not expecting the first part to go that way. I was not.
Sorry, did you want me to engage? Did you want me to enthuse you more to allow you to get angry?
I wanted to spiral until we were both screaming at the screen about how hard it is to get deliveries. And I don't appreciate your facts. And I don't appreciate your rigor.
To be fair, I still do think that they need to improve an awful lot. And, fair dinkum, we've gone to Royal Mail and asked them for a response to this stuff. They're missing their targets. They shouldn't be missing their targets. But I think that we are slightly culpable as well.
They have promised to spend, and I'll probably cut this back into the first bit because I should have said this. They are spending £500 million on updating all of their service. They are really motivated by changing their service, improving their service, and they're working hard on it. Anyway, part 2. That's what we're doing. Business Secretary Peter Kyle is spending his London Tech Week going on right now to set out his vision for the economy. The UK will be taking bigger stakes in bigger companies, with taxpayers owning more of privately owned businesses. How much of a company does a government have to own before it becomes nationalised is a conversation for a whole different day. But Kyle has been using very strong language, so he was speaking to the Sunday Times. You see Nigel Farage going around beating his chest. I think he's just aggressive without a purpose. I want to be aggressive with a purpose. When it comes to aggressive ambition, this government isn't going to sit aside from businesses we are backing. I want that partnership to be felt in a much more meaningful way. And what Kyle means by that is he wants the UK to keep British-born businesses in the UK. So the self-driving company Wave, not the similarly spelt, but differently spelt Waymo, is partnering with Uber to roll out self-driving cars this summer in London, albeit with a human driver behind the wheel. It's a baffling story, but it's estimated that Wave has a market cap of around $8.6 billion or around £6.5 billion, but the government has invested around £25 million in that. And seemingly, the government has now been lobbying the government for regulatory approval, which it's a story with many tentacles, and all of my brain hurts, and I don't fully know what the end game is. Chris, can you shed any light on the idea of whether or not this aggressive ambition is a good or bad thing, and what that will actually mean in the sort of tech startup space?
Did you mean to say the government is lobbying the government?
Yeah. It really is. Like, to get approval for for self-driving cars, the business secretary has said that he is making phone calls to the Department for Transport, and because it's in London, the Mayor of London's office, to make sure that it can get regulatory approval. So in effect, the government, and the point about how much this is politics and how much of this is real work, the government is lobbying the government to get regulatory approval for self-driving, albeit with a driver behind the wheel. So yeah, that is in a way what's happening.
That's a great metaphor for the UK at the minute, isn't it? The government is lobbying the government for self-driving cars that aren't self-driving because they have a person behind them.
Yeah, we've solved it. We have the where is the UK? Yep, pinpoint. Next question.
No, I mean, so I guess there's a couple of questions that spool out from this. One is it good that the government is supporting private enterprise? Yes. Like, we need that. We need to be more competitive. This is a very cutthroat world. One of the big, brickbats that is often thrown against the UK is we have literally almost all the talent in the world, often on this kind of bleeding edge of stuff. But we lose it very, very quickly to more attractive investment environments, places that's better to build a business. And so trying to change that by catalyzing investment into those businesses, by having governments take a stake and therefore have some sort of ownership, both literally and in terms of metaphorically, in the future success of them, is a good thing. The second part, I suppose, is that necessarily good that the average person's taxpayers' money is being put into companies, some of which will be massive successes and roaring successes, some of which will flop, and you don't really know which. Probably less so. The risk appetite of governments should be much lower than the risk appetite of venture capitalists. And I'm not entirely certain that, although we have historically been very, very small c conservative as a country in terms of this sort of stuff, we have way more money squirreled away in cash savings than pretty much any other advanced economy. And that is part of the reason why Rachel Reeves has been pushing towards having that mandate for, unless you are really old and getting towards the end of your retirement, the idea that you have to then invest at least half of your ISA, if your abilities to invest money is such, into a stocks and shares ISA rather than a cash ISA. The idea of actually getting your money moving is seen as important. But I think the public appetite for that is still not there. And so if you're saying you have to, through your tax paying, end up investing in companies that are doing self-driving cars that aren't necessarily going to be self-driving, or in a unproven biologics test that could be the next big thing or could be the next graphene in terms of being tomorrow's technology, but not actually happening. Sorry,
graphene tennis rackets are real. They exist. Graphene golf clubs are real.
It's all well and good for the government to say that you need to spend a lot more money in there, but I don't know whether or not taxpayers would be willing to countenance risking all of their cash on the promise of some sort of very odd graphene technology that is not actually going to become a real thing, because it hasn't become a real thing in the last 10 years, beyond golf clubs, as you were saying at some point. In one way, it's good. I think that it's a very hard sell to the public, or a large section of the public. There's a difference between kind of like London maxing Twitter, which is like, great, this is fantastic. We're putting money finally into high growth, early stage businesses because that is the world in which they inhabit. I'm not convinced that the rest of the country feels that way. And that is the problem that the government has in trying to sell this, I think, to the average person, which is why I think it's so baffling that they're trying to do this just a few weeks ahead of a really crucial by-election for the future of the government, the future of the Prime Minister, and arguably the future of the Labour Party, because it's very easy for Reform or for Restore or for the Tories or anybody, frankly even the Greens as well, to go, look, they're going to just spaff all your money on some like tech bros in London, whereas actually, they don't care about you if you're not based in the capital.
Does you see it as that London-centric? Is that even because it's a national thing? It's about the big British businesses. It's Britain first. It's this exciting new tech revolution or startup revolution to make sure people can get funded. Well, that's a different discussion. But the point is to back British business wherever they are. Or do you think that actually that makes it already sound a bit too London-centric for it to be useful?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard this song 15 times before. And London gets everything. Manchester gets the dregs. Everybody else gets nothing. Forgive me for being cynical about this sort of stuff, but I live in a place that has been repeatedly overlooked, right? Like, let's look, for instance, in recent history. Gosh, 9 months ago, OpenAI was building a data center in Blythe, just down the road from me. What's happened to that? That's been paused. Surprise, surprise. No funding for us up here. So no, I'm hugely cynical about it. I mean, like, again, I inhabit one world, which is that very tech forward world, and I see that as being a really good thing. But I also recognize that, when we're talking about even just like Tech Week, there's a school of thought, and I've seen it on social media, that says we shouldn't be talking about this being London Tech Week because it is for the whole of the UK's tech sector. But it is called London Tech Week, and everything happens in London. I had to go down to South by Southwest in London last week. They weren't initially going to pay for travel and accommodation until I pointed out that I'm based in Newcastle. Like, I get invites all the time to lunches, to interviews, to meetings, to sideline events. Oh, if you just come along to this thing at 6:30 p.m, then we'd love to have you. Here's a dinner for you with this executive. Great. Who's paying for my train back home at midnight or for my hotel room in London? Oh, we don't have the money. Tom Forth has a really good example of the other side of this, where he's always invited to breakfast meetings in London. Tom Forth, the Leeds-based, maybe now Manchester-based, actually, sorry. I think actually he splits his time between the two. Used to also be in Birmingham, so he's done the tour.
He's done all the major cities.
Yeah, he's done the tour of Britain's cities that are not London, and he gets really frustrated by the fact that he's invited to these breakfast meetings to talk about how important it is that we devolve power outside of London at London-based events that begin at 8:30 in the morning, and he has a 2.5-hour train that is invariably delayed that he has to go on if he wants to turn up to them.
I was at a breakfast at 7:30 this morning, so but also that was a 35-minute journey, so slightly different. But have you? The main question is, have we asked him to be on the show yet? I know you said you would. Have you asked him yet?
I have not. I mean, we can talk. He will talk about anything. He knows everything. He knows everything about everything, I think, Tom.
I'm just going to sit in this. Just listen mainly. Back on topic, right? So the big parallels of what the Kyle's sort of real push for aggressive business growth has been made is around Harold Wilson's push in the early 70s. He was prime minister in a time when you couldn't really move left, and it was again a similar thing about growth being good and the growth being the real driver of this. And there are two paths by which this could take, and of course we're only going to choose one. There can't possibly be any nuance. It's either British Leyland, which of course became British Leyland, and Rolls-Royce. So around similar time there was big investments from the government. We're not going to get into the detail of that long, but Rolls-Royce has been seen as this international global success, and British Leyland just collapsed. So is it going to be one, the other, combination of the two? And given that, like you say, we've heard this story before in a number of different, like, close echoes of stuff that both this Labour government and wider governments have tried previously to make sure the country is growing, firstly, and secondly, that the taxpayer is getting value for money, whatever that means. Is this a new thing, and can it be successful, or are we just going to repeat the mistakes of the past?
I think that we stand a better chance of being successful than previous attempts, in large part because the people who are overseeing it, not within government, but the advisors that have been brought in, they are really, really good. Like the one thing, I remain kind of standoffish and a bit cynical about this sort of stuff. But the one thing that I can say is all the people that are fronting these things, the government has done incredibly well to get. They're like really properly mentors. And that I think is impressive. So if anything is going to stand a chance of success, it's stuff that is currently coming down the pipeline because the people involved, frankly, are not government pilled. They've not been there for 20 years. They're not necessarily thinking in the same way. Now, do I think that those people who are like deep in business and then move over and do a kind of business secondment to government, doing their kind of national service, as it were, and really changing what we're doing here, do I think that they fully are able to kind of disperse all of the benefits across all of the country? No, because they're coming up against a big monolithic machine. And also probably a lot of them have been based in London for a long time, and so you become a little bit insular there. But I do think that we stand a better chance than we ever have done because there is something genuinely exciting happening here. And I think that is often, we are often quite cynical and often quite cynical is the wrong word, but skeptical, sort of asking for proof and evidence.
We have said cynical a lot in this episode.
We have. Well, you start basically we've gathered it around your cynicism about the way in which you did not get a cricket back. This is the whole episode. So we have to acknowledge this.
One final question on this, and I wasn't fully aware of this, so this hurt my mind a bit, and so it's quite a tricky question. But so this is according to Andrew O'Brien writing in Unheard on Tuesday. The government has been forced into action on this sort of business investment because of the steady erosion of British capitalism. So according to the latest available data, 56% of the UK's largest businesses, so that's companies with turnover over 500 million, are foreign owned. The ownership is concentrated in the most productive sectors such as manufacturing and technology, where Britain is banking on its future growth. So is this a response to the steady erosion of British capitalism, or is that Andrew O'Brien writing an Unheard's opinion and nothing more?
There's probably a germ of truth to it. Again, cynically, yes, probably there is. But again, you have to bear in mind the politics of Unheard. It is slightly centre right. I think it's in opposition, fair to say, to the Labour government at the minute. So they are always likely to say that something is reactive rather than proactive. I think probably the reality of the situation is somewhere in between.
There you go, crashed for nuance and debates. And actually, for what it's worth, I think the idea around the erosion of British capitalism feels such a flawed, jingoistic Britain first principle, albeit we are now out of the European Union, albeit the trading negotiations around every different trading agreement that we have is complicated because of Britain's desperation for autonomy at the expense of universal standards. Understand all of that. But actually, the idea of contemplating the capitalism eroding because British owned businesses is eroding. I think that there's work to be done around, what ARM is doing and how ARM moved into the US, and if that is still British or if that is global or everything is global. Why are we still obsessing over individual countries' borders? There is more unilateral work to be done between governments around what these tax breaks do and how innovation is incubated rather than it just being the capitalist goal. But to talk about it as a British erosion, the erosion of British capitalism, I think is a little bit playing into all of the populism and the binaryism that we are currently faced with.
Mm-hmm, indeed, and that's part of the problem, right? I think is there are talking points that people can make here that aren't exactly going to be based in what is actually happening. So when you're talking about anything to do with politics, there's always going to be that element of how do you kind of argue against this, and so on and so forth.
So we will continue to have difficult debates when we're back after this short break. Welcome back to the final part of Crash, where we'll hopefully be more optimistic than we have been throughout the rest of the programme. In the section, questions to which there is no answers to. Chris, did the invention of the iPhone stop people having children? Nothing is optimistic today.
No. What a paper this was. So we both independently found this, an NBER, so National Bureau of Economic Research paper in the US, a couple of them actually, I think, seem to link the idea of the advent of the iPhone with a massive downturn in fertility rates across the US more broadly. I mean, what did you make of this? I thought it was kind of interesting that it's very much like they should just have on every single page as the sort of header, like correlation is not causation, but nonetheless quite interesting.
So I think the correlation is interesting. I think if people are given enough stuff to do, I think that's the. So it's in the same way as there is a clear correlation between the iPhone invention and the downfall of democracy. Is that causational? Are we going to get into that? So it's fascinating that now that is being thought of as a meaningful thing, but it ties in with all this sort of false nostalgia of the 90s and false nostalgia of the 80s, and even now, because we're old, the noughties of back before smartphones. And yet you look back at the testimony of those people and everyone was bored. People didn't have anything to do. People were stuck with those 4 channels. When did Channel 5 launch? Whenever Channel 5 launched, those small number of channels. And people,
New Year's Eve 1999, no?
there you go.
So there was, sorry.
And
1997, March the 30th, 1997. I was way off. Jeez.
Hold on, what was the first thing on Channel 5? Was it Spice Girls?
Yeah, Spice. They recorded a specific song only for the launch of Channel 5.
You don't get that with every other podcast. So I think that lack of choice, I think you can get, there's a whole deep debate around the death of community caused by iPhone. There's a whole different thing about loneliness being caused by technology advances. There's such a deep thing. It's such an emerging space that we don't have enough good data or the long-term enough data to figure it out wholly. But the fact that there is that academic intrigue around the damage or the impact, again, like impact and damage, two very different things, for what actually are birth rates declining because of the iPhone, or are birth rates declining for all manner of million things, including the cost of raising a child? Like you could list like 25 different things. Yeah. Is this one of them? Fascinating that 2 papers have come out at similar times, and I think the biggest thing about this is it makes for a fucking fantastic headline, and that's why it's been picked up so wide. Well, it is being picked up widely. The New York Times has published, and so you can see where this is going to go.
It's a really interesting paper as well, because it takes advantage of the fact that the iPhone initially in the United States was only available through one carrier, through AT&T. At least one of the papers looks at, birth rates and fertility rates. Fertility rates is such a horrible way of describing it, but that's, I guess, the scientific way of doing it. In US counties around the country that had higher levels of AT&T access compared to other providers. And yeah, it turns out that it kind of attributes, I think, between one of the papers, at least between a third and half of the decline to the iPhone, saying that there are other confounding factors. But yeah, it was such a good paper. And I felt really annoyed when you sent me the New York Times link, because I was like, well, now I can't write about it. So
I feel like you still can. What is that? It feels like that's
US. Too smelly now. Too old. Everybody's done it.
That's the American angle. There's a UK angle to be right around to be done. Talk to the researchers, see if there's any comparative data. Didn't iPhone launch in a single network in the UK as well?
Good question. Let's go to Google.
I think it went to O2 first.
iPhone launch only on one network in the
This
UK.
podcast has been edited for brevity while Chris Googles.
Yeah, O2, you were correct. O2 only.
So yeah, the British story is still there to be told.
Yeah, but yeah, I can't bother. My question to which there is no answer, Alex, is when will we get, based on the first part of this episode, when will we get the liberation of the postcode address file?
What do you mean by the postcode address file?
Okay. So you're not a PAF truther. That's okay. We're a very small group, founded by tech journalist James O'Malley, who has made it his life's work to liberate from private control the postcode address file. So this is the database that basically every single website, every single service, every single e-commerce platform uses to locate where you are. So the reason why your cricket bat arrived at your door and you weren't there. Bag. Sorry. The reason why your cricket bag arrived at your door and you were not there is
it was designed to go to the post office. Let's be clear about that. It was never designed to come to the house.
The postcode address file still works in that instance then. So meant to go to the post office has a postcode. That is a database that Royal Mail requires payment for to access. And it's a big money spinner for them. But James O'Malley, several other people, believe that this is a public right, that people should have access to this because it unlocks so much opportunity to be able to get access to it. And so he regularly campaigns for this. And so, yeah, the question to which there is no answer is very difficult for you to answer given that you weren't aware of that at the start. So that's okay. But it is well worth looking into. And if you are a high-powered listener of Crash sitting in Whitehall and you want a surefire vote winner ahead of your election coming up in Makerfield, a couple of weeks, all I would say, liberate the postcode address file.
Well, this week I did find out we have listeners and viewers high up Ofcom. That's what I found out this week, so that's exciting. In answer to your question, I think if I know nothing about this, so I'm going to go entirely off the top of my head. It's going to be great. Surely, the database stuff will be liberated. It's not going to be liberated. Royal Mail need all the money they can get. They're investing half a £500 million in the new services. They are looking, and I think as all business models become tighter and tighter, and they're looking for those rundles of those licensing deals that they can make. The idea that as much campaigning or as nice as you think as any candidate or candidates are available in Makerfield might use this as a campaigning tool feels ambitious. I think people are kind of fine with postcodes, aren't they? It's just that businesses are being, you pay 3% for your credit card fees, you pay 3% to process payments, you pay the 3% for this, 3% for this. It's just part of doing business, except for the App Store, which is still, well, that's now not 30% anymore because of the court findings. But it is a price of doing business. And I think if you're going to spend that time campaigning on it, there are bigger and more important things to focus on, particularly as the amount of post halves.
I suppose, but it's not just about posts, it's about all sorts of other stuff as well. That makes it much more difficult. There's an argument because effectively the argument is that this is a tax on top of pretty much every service that requires your address. So from, gas supplies to billing to retail to anything, because companies have to pay to access the file in order to get reputable information. And then, of course, they want to pass on those charges because they don't want to be left on the hook for it. So it's an interesting one to look into. Again, maybe we should just get James O'Malley on to talk, rant for about an hour about the postcode address file.
That's what our audience wants. More post office chat. More of that.
If you do, you know where to find us. Drop us emails, alex@crash.org.uk and chris@crash.org.uk. And if you really don't want to, then keep it to yourself.
Crashed is an Everything Popular is Wrong production. Follow us on all your favourite podcast platforms. Title music from Nuffer. Love their work. Check them out on the streamers. Hosted by Acast, assisted by Riverside Studios. We're published every Thursday morning. Get in touch. Email alex@crash.org.uk, chris@crash.org.uk. We've had some really beautiful correspondence this week. It's lovely to hear from you. We will chat to you, except for that one post who called us dorks, which didn't really go down that well. Not really funny. Get in touch, but it's lovely to hear from you. At Alex Hudson, all the socials, at Stokel on X, and Chris is still using X, but go to crashcrash.com or search for Crash Podcast on Substack or Google or wherever you want. We'll be back next